The muffled cries echoed through the marble corridors of the Jefferson County Courthouse, barely audible above the steady hum of fluorescent lights and the distant shuffle of legal proceedings. Court clerk Sandra Martinez paused mid-stride, her stack of manila folders clutched against her chest as she tilted her head toward the sound. The building's acoustics played tricks sometimes, voices bouncing off high ceilings and polished floors. But this was different. This was desperate. "Hello, is someone there?" The voice was young, strained with panic, and something else she couldn't quite identify. Sandra set down her files and followed the sound, her heels clicking against the cold stone floor. The cries seemed to be coming from the maintenance wing, past the public restrooms and vending machines, where only staff members typically ventured. She pressed her ear against the door of storage room 3B, her breath catching as she heard the unmistakable sound of someone trying to get out. The handle wouldn't turn when she tried it, the electronic lock system showing a solid red light. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone to call security. But then she hesitated. Something about the voice made her stomach clench with unease. 2 hours earlier, DeShawn Williams had been sitting in the courthouse's main waiting area, his fingers drumming a complex rhythm against his thigh as he watched people move through the space. At 17, he was tall and lean, with gentle brown eyes that took in every detail of his surroundings. The way the light streamed through the tall windows created shifting patterns on the floor that he found both fascinating and calming. His adoptive mother, Janet, sat beside him, occasionally reaching over to still his hand when the drumming became too pronounced. "How much longer?" "Mom," DeShawn asked, his voice carrying the slight cadence that marked his autism. He'd been working with a speech therapist for years, and while his communication had improved dramatically, the stress of new environments sometimes brought back the distinctive rhythm of his earlier years. Janet checked her phone, her own nerves evident in the way she kept smoothing her skirt. "Judge Henderson's office said they'd call us in around 2:30. Your father should be finishing up his morning cases soon." She smiled at him, the same warm expression that had helped him through countless difficult moments over the past 3 years. "Are you okay? I know all this legal stuff can be overwhelming." DeShawn nodded, though his eyes kept darting to the various uniformed personnel moving through the building. Police officers, bailiffs, security guards, all of them represented authority figures who had not always been kind to him in the past. The adoption finalization was supposed to be a celebration, the legal conclusion of a process that had already transformed his life. Janet and Judge Marcus Henderson had been his foster parents for 3 years, and now the courts would make it official. Still, the formal atmosphere made him edgy. "I'm going to get some water," he said, standing up with the careful movements that helped him maintain his equilibrium in stressful situations. Janet nodded, familiar with his need for small breaks and quiet moments. As DeShawn made his way toward the water fountain near the elevators, he caught sight of the building's architectural details. The courthouse had been built in the 1920s, and despite renovations, it maintained an air of old-world grandeur that he found appealing. The intricate molding around the doorways, the pattern of the marble flooring, the way the afternoon light created geometric shadows, all of it helped calm his nervous system. He was examining a particularly interesting frieze carved into the wall when a sharp voice cut through his concentration. "Excuse me, son. What are you doing here?" DeShawn turned to see a security guard approaching, her uniform crisp and her expression stern. Officer HOA Cops had been working courthouse security for 15 years, and she prided herself on maintaining order in what she considered her domain. At 52, she had developed a reputation for being thorough, some might say overzealous, in her duties. "I'm waiting for my adoption hearing," DeShawn replied, his voice automatically becoming more formal in response to her tone. My mom is over there in the waiting area. Officer Copps looked in the direction he indicated, but Janet was momentarily obscured by a group of lawyers discussing a case. I don't see anyone who looks like your mother, she said, her eyes narrowing as she took in DeShawn's appearance. His nervous stimming, the way he avoided direct eye contact, and his presence near the elevators without apparent supervision, triggered her suspicions. She's right there, in the blue dress, DeShawn said, pointing again. But now Janet had stepped away to make a phone call, and the waiting area looked different from this angle. His heart began to race as he realized how the situation might appear to someone who didn't know him. Son, I need you to come with me, Officer Copps said, her hand moving to her radio. We've had reports of suspicious individuals in the building, and I can't have you wandering around unattended. I'm not wandering, DeShawn protested, his voice rising slightly. I was just getting water. My adoption hearing is in Judge Henderson's courtroom. The mention of Judge Henderson caused Officer Copps to pause, but rather than reassuring her, it seemed to fuel her suspicion. A lot of people claim to know judges when they're trying to avoid security measures, she said coldly. I'm going to need to see some identification and verify your story. DeShawn reached for his wallet, but his hands were shaking now, and the familiar anxiety response was kicking in. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter, the sounds of the courthouse louder, and Officer Copps' continued questioning was making it hard for him to think clearly. When he fumbled with his wallet and nearly dropped it, she interpreted his nervous behavior as further evidence of wrongdoing. That's enough, she said sharply. You're coming with me until we can sort this out. For security reasons, I'm going to have to isolate you until we can verify your identity and your reason for being here. Please, I can show you my mom, DeShawn said, his voice breaking slightly. She's just around the corner. This is a mistake. But Officer Copps had already made up her mind. She gripped his arm firmly and began steering him toward the maintenance wing, away from the public areas. The more you resist, the longer this is going to take, she warned. I'm just doing my job, keeping everyone safe. DeShawn's world narrowed to the feeling of her hand on his arm, the echo of their footsteps in the corridor, and the growing panic in his chest. He tried to explain again, but the words came out jumbled, his speech patterns becoming more pronounced under stress. To Officer Copps, his difficulty communicating only confirmed her suspicions about his mental state and potential threat level. The storage room door opened with a beep as Officer Copps swiped her security card. You'll wait in here while I verify your story, she said, guiding him inside. It's for your own safety as much as everyone else's. The room was small, lined with metal shelving containing office supplies and maintenance equipment. A single bare bulb provided harsh lighting, and there were no windows. As the door closed behind him with a definitive click, DeShawn felt the walls of the room pressing in on him. Wait, he called out, but the electronic lock had already engaged. He pressed his hands against the door, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. The confined space, the artificial lighting, and the growing realization that he was trapped triggered every anxiety response his body possessed. Meanwhile, Janet Williams had finished her phone call and returned to the waiting area, expecting to find DeShawn by the water fountain. When she didn't see him immediately, she felt a familiar flutter of concern. He usually stayed close, especially in unfamiliar environments. She checked the men's restroom, asked the information desk, and even looked outside in case he'd needed fresh air. After 20 minutes of searching, her concern escalated to worry. She approached the security desk, where a different officer was stationed. Excuse me, I'm looking for my son. He's 17, about 6 feet tall, wearing a blue button-down shirt. We're here for an adoption hearing, and he was just getting water. The officer, a middle-aged man named Frank Rodriguez, consulted his logbook. I haven't seen anyone matching that description come through the main entrance recently. When did you last see him? About 25 minutes ago, Janet replied, her voice tight with growing anxiety. His name is DeShawn Williams. He's autistic, and he doesn't handle stress well. This building can be overwhelming for him. Officer Rodriguez immediately picked up his radio. All units. We have a missing person report. African American male, 17 years old, approximately 6 feet tall, blue shirt, last seen near the main waiting area. Subject has autism and may be in distress. The radio crackled with responses from various security personnel throughout the building. But, notably, Officer Copps didn't respond. She was busy at her post, having apparently forgotten about the young man she'd locked away, her attention diverted by other duties. As the search expanded, Janet called her husband directly. Judge Marcus Henderson was in his chambers, reviewing case files between hearings, when his phone rang. Marcus, I can't find DeShawn. Janet's voice was strained with barely controlled panic. He went to get water half an hour ago, and he's just gone. Security is looking. But you know how he gets in new situations. What if he's having a panic attack somewhere? Judge Henderson felt his stomach drop. He'd been looking forward to this day for months. The legal finalization of DeShawn's adoption was supposed to be a celebration, not a crisis. I'm coming down right now, he said, already standing up from his desk. Have security check every room, every floor. And Janet, he's going to be okay. We'll find him. But even as he spoke the words, Marcus Henderson felt a cold dread settling in his chest. He'd been a family court judge for over a decade, and he'd seen too many cases where vulnerable young people had been failed by the very systems meant to protect them. The thought of DeShawn, scared and alone somewhere in the building, made him feel physically ill. In storage room 3B, DeShawn had managed to get his breathing under control, but the situation was becoming more desperate by the minute. The room was warm, stuffy, and the single light bulb cast harsh shadows that seemed to move and shift. He'd tried the door handle dozens of times, called out until his voice was hoarse, and even tried to text his mom. But his phone had no signal in the interior room. His coping mechanisms, developed over years of therapy and practice, were being tested to their limits. He counted the shelves, traced patterns in the air with his fingers, and tried to remember the breathing exercises his therapist had taught him. But the combination of confinement, uncertainty, and the growing realization that something had gone very wrong was breaking down his defenses. "Mom," he called out, his voice cracking with emotion. "Somebody please help me. I don't understand what's happening." It was these cries that Sandra Martinez heard as she passed through the maintenance wing. After calling security and getting no immediate response, she'd decided to investigate further. The electronic lock on the storage room door was beyond her access level, but she could hear the distress in the young man's voice. "Hello, can you hear me?" she called through the door. "What's your name? How did you get in there?" "My name is DeShawn Williams," came the muffled reply. "A security guard put me in here. She said she had to verify my identity, but that was over an hour ago. I'm supposed to be at my adoption hearing." Sandra's heart sank as the pieces began to fall into place. She'd heard the radio chatter about a missing teenager, and now she'd found him. "DeShawn, my name is Sandra. I work here at the courthouse. I'm going to get you out of there. Okay, just hold on." She immediately called the security desk, her voice sharp with urgency. This is Sandra Martinez in the clerk's office. I've found the missing teenager. He's been locked in storage room 3B for over an hour. Someone needs to get down here with a master key right now. The response was immediate and explosive. Officer Rodriguez arrived within minutes, followed closely by Judge Henderson and Janet Williams. The sight of the locked door, with DeShawn's voice clearly audible from inside, sent shockwaves through everyone present. "DeShawn, honey, it's Mom," Janet called out, pressing her palms against the door. "We're going to get you out of there right now. Dad's here too." "Mom." DeShawn's voice was thick with relief and tears. "I don't understand what happened. The security lady said I was suspicious, and then she locked me in here. I kept telling her about the adoption hearing, but she wouldn't listen." Judge Henderson's face had gone pale with fury. "Officer Rodriguez, I want that door opened immediately, and I want to know exactly how my son ended up locked in a storage closet. This is unconscionable." The revelation that the missing teenager was Judge Henderson's adoptive son sent ripples of shock through the gathered courthouse staff. Rodriguez fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking as he realized the magnitude of what had occurred. The electronic lock disengaged with a soft beep, and the door swung open to reveal DeShawn, disheveled and clearly traumatized, but physically unharmed. Janet rushed to embrace him, and he collapsed into her arms, his tall frame shaking with suppressed sobs. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered into his hair. "This should never have happened. You're safe now." Judge Henderson placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, his judicial composure warring with paternal rage. "DeShawn, I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Every detail you can remember." Through halting sentences, DeShawn recounted his interaction with Officer Copps, from the initial questioning to being forcibly escorted to the storage room. As his story unfolded, the faces of the courthouse staff grew increasingly grim. This wasn't just a case of mistaken identity or overzealous security. It was a clear violation of DeShawn's civil rights and a stunning example of institutional prejudice. "Where is Officer Copps now?" Judge Henderson asked, his voice deadly quiet. Rodriguez radioed for her location, and the response came back that she was at her regular post near the north entrance. "Sir, should I ask her to report to your office?" "No," Judge Henderson replied, helping DeShawn to his feet. "We're going to her. I want this conversation to happen exactly where she made the decision to lock up my child." The group made their way through the courthouse corridors, drawing curious stares from lawyers, clerks, and visitors. Word was already spreading through the building's informal communication networks. The judge's son had been locked in a closet by security, and there was going to be hell to pay. Officer HOA Copps was checking IDs at the North Security checkpoint when she looked up to see Judge Henderson approaching with what appeared to be an entourage. Her first instinct was to straighten her posture and prepare for whatever official business was bringing a judge to her station. Then she saw DeShawn among the group, and her stomach dropped. "Officer Copps," Judge Henderson said, his voice carrying the authority of his office and the controlled fury of a parent. "I believe you know my son, DeShawn Williams." The word son hit Officer Copps like a physical blow. She looked from the judge to DeShawn and back again, her mind racing to process the implications. "Sir, there must be some mistake. I was just following security protocols when I encountered this individual." "This individual," Judge Henderson interrupted, "is my 17-year-old son, who was here for his adoption hearing. The hearing that I was supposed to preside over. The hearing that we're now 2 hours late for because you decided to lock him in a storage closet." The security checkpoint had gone completely silent. Other officers had gathered, along with courthouse staff, and even some of the lawyers who'd been waiting in line. Officer Copps felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her as she struggled to formulate a response. "I was just doing my job," she said weakly. "He was acting suspiciously, and I couldn't verify his identity. I followed proper procedures for handling potential security threats." Proper procedures. Janet Williams stepped forward, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You locked a disabled teenager in a closet for over an hour without verifying his story, without checking with your colleagues, without even trying to locate his family. What part of that sounds like proper procedure to you?" DeShawn, who had been standing quietly beside his parents, suddenly spoke up. "I told you about the adoption hearing. I told you Judge Henderson was my dad. I tried to show you my ID, but you wouldn't let me. You said I was suspicious because I was nervous, but I'm always nervous in new places. That's just how I am." His words, delivered with the honest directness that characterized his communication, cut through the tension like a knife. Here was the victim of Officer Copps' prejudice and incompetence, speaking his truth with dignity, despite the trauma he'd endured. Judge Henderson pulled out his phone, and the sight of it sent a new wave of panic through Officer Copps. "Sir, what are you doing?" "I'm calling Channel 7 News," he replied calmly. "This story needs to be told. The public needs to know that our courthouse security detained a disabled minor for over an hour based on nothing more than racial profiling and ableist assumptions." "Please, Judge Henderson," Officer Copps pleaded. "I made a mistake. I can see that now. But involving the media will destroy my career, my reputation. I have a family to support." Judge Henderson paused, his finger hovering over his phone screen. "You made a choice to abuse your authority and traumatize my child. You made a choice to ignore his repeated attempts to explain his situation. You made a choice to see a threat where there was only a nervous teenager waiting for the most important day of his life." He looked around at the gathered crowd. "But I'm going to make a different choice." The courthouse had gone completely silent. Even the usual background noise of legal proceedings seemed to have stopped, as everyone waited to hear what Judge Henderson would do next. "I'm not calling the media," he said finally. "But I am calling an emergency meeting of the courthouse administration. We're going to review every single security protocol in this building. And we're going to implement mandatory training on disability awareness and implicit bias. And Officer Copps, you're going to be the first person to complete that training." Relief flooded Officer Copps's face, but Judge Henderson wasn't finished. "You're also going to be suspended without pay for 30 days while we conduct a full investigation of this incident. And if we find that you've engaged in similar behavior in the past, your employment here will be terminated immediately." The crowd began to disperse, but the impact of what had just occurred continued to reverberate through the building. Sandra Martinez, who had been the one to find DeShawn, approached the family. "I'm so sorry this happened," she said to DeShawn directly. "You showed incredible strength in how you handled such a frightening situation. I hope you know that most of us who work here would never treat anyone the way you were treated today." DeShawn nodded, his equilibrium slowly returning now that he was safely with his family. "Thank you for finding me. I was starting to think maybe everyone had forgotten about me." "We could never forget about you," Janet said, squeezing his hand. "You're our son, and we love you. Nothing that happened today changes that." Judge Henderson checked his watch and made a decision. "We're going to postpone the adoption hearing until tomorrow. After what DeShawn has been through today, I think we all need some time to process this experience. Actually, Dad, DeShawn said quietly, I'd like to do the hearing today if that's okay. I know it sounds weird, but I don't want what happened with Officer Cops to be the thing I remember about today. I want to remember becoming officially part of our family. Judge Henderson felt his eyes fill with tears at his son's resilience and wisdom. If that's what you want, then that's what we'll do. But I can't preside over my own child's adoption hearing. We'll need to get Judge Martinez from the Family Court Division. An hour later, the Williams family stood in Judge Martinez's courtroom for the adoption finalization ceremony. DeShawn wore a fresh shirt that Janet had brought from the car, and his hair was neatly combed. But the emotional weight of the day's events was still visible in his careful movements and the way he stayed close to his parents. Judge Martinez, who had been briefed on the morning's events, addressed DeShawn directly before beginning the formal proceedings. Young man, I want you to know that what happened to you today was completely unacceptable. This courthouse is supposed to be a place where justice is served and families are protected. Today, we failed you, and I'm personally committed to making sure it never happens again. Thank you, Your Honor, DeShawn replied. But I'm okay now. I have my family, and they never gave up looking for me. That's what matters. As Judge Martinez read through the adoption decree, making legal what had been emotional reality for 3 years, DeShawn felt the events of the day settling into perspective. The trauma of being locked away, the fear and confusion, the way Officer Cops had refused to see him as anything more than a threat, all of it was real, and all of it mattered. But it didn't define him, and it didn't diminish the joy of this moment. When Judge Martinez declared the adoption final, Janet and Marcus Henderson officially became DeShawn's legal parents, and he became their son in the eyes of the law. The small gathering of family friends and courthouse staff who had assembled for the ceremony erupted in applause, and DeShawn found himself smiling, despite everything that had happened. 3 months later, the Jefferson County Courthouse implemented new security protocols developed in consultation with disability rights advocates and community leaders. Officer HOA Cops completed her suspension and extensive retraining, though she ultimately chose to transfer to a different department, where her contact with the public would be more limited. The storage room where DeShawn had been confined was converted into a quiet room for courthouse visitors who needed a break from the sensory overload of the building's busy atmosphere. A small plaque by the door read, "In recognition of the dignity and rights of all who seek justice here." DeShawn Williams graduated from high school the following year and enrolled in community college, where he studied computer programming. He occasionally visited the courthouse with his parents, and each time, he noticed the small changes that had been implemented, the additional training materials in the security office, the new protocols posted at each checkpoint, the way staff members were more attentive to visitors who might need extra assistance. On a warm spring afternoon, almost a year after the incident, DeShawn was walking through the courthouse lobby when he encountered Sandra Martinez, the clerk who had found him behind the locked door. "DeShawn," she said warmly, "how are you doing? I heard you started college." "I'm doing really well, Ms. Martinez. Thank you for asking." He paused, looking around the familiar space. "You know, I still think about that day sometimes. Not just the bad parts, but the good parts too. How quickly my parents found me. How many people helped. How things changed afterward." Sandra nodded thoughtfully. "It was a terrible thing that happened to you, but you handled it with such grace. A lot of people here learned important lessons because of your courage." "I think maybe that's the point," DeShawn said. "Sometimes bad things happen, but they don't have to be the end of the story. they can be the beginning of something better. As he walked away, Sandra reflected on the wisdom of his words. The courthouse was a place where people came seeking justice, resolution, and new beginnings. For the Williams family, it had been all three, though not in the way they had expected. The day that began with such trauma had ultimately strengthened their bonds as a family and improved conditions for everyone who would walk through those doors in the future. DeShawn continued his studies, eventually earning a degree in computer science and finding work with a tech company that valued both his technical skills and his unique perspective on accessibility and inclusion. He became an advocate for disability rights in his community, often speaking at schools and organizations about the importance of seeing beyond stereotypes and assumptions. The courthouse incident became a defining moment, not just for DeShawn, but for everyone who witnessed it. It served as a stark reminder that justice isn't just about what happens in courtrooms. It's about how we treat each other in every interaction, every day. The changes implemented at the Jefferson County Courthouse became a model for other institutions, and DeShawn's story was often cited as an example of how individual courage can spark systemic change. Years later, when DeShawn returned to the courthouse for jury duty, he passed by the quiet room that had once been a storage closet. The space was now filled with comfortable seating, soft lighting, and resources for visitors who needed a moment of calm in the midst of stressful legal proceedings. A young mother sat there with her autistic son, helping him regulate his breathing after a difficult meeting with a social worker. DeShawn knocked gently on the doorframe. "Excuse me, is everything okay?" The mother looked up, her eyes red with exhaustion and worry. "He's just overwhelmed. All the noise and people. It's hard for him." "I understand," DeShawn said quietly. "My name is DeShawn. I'm autistic too, and I know how scary this place can feel. But the people here are good people, and they're going to help you get through whatever you're facing." He spent a few minutes talking with the boy, sharing coping strategies and reassuring him that his feelings were valid and understandable. When they were ready to continue with their court business, the mother squeezed DeShawn's hand. "Thank you. You have no idea how much that meant to both of us." As DeShawn walked toward the jury assembly room, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The scared 17-year-old who had been locked in a closet had grown into a confident young man who could offer comfort and hope to others facing similar challenges. The trauma had been real, but it hadn't been the end of his story. It had been the catalyst for a life dedicated to justice, inclusion, and the belief that every person deserves to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity. The courthouse continued to serve its community, now with protocols and practices that better reflected the values of justice and equality it was meant to uphold. And in the quiet room that had once held such fear and darkness, families found peace, understanding, and the support they needed to navigate one of life's most challenging systems. The sound behind the door had been one of desperation and fear, but it had ultimately become the catalyst for hope, change, and a more just future for all who sought justice within those marble walls. In the end, DeShawn Williams had found much more than legal adoption. He had found his voice, his purpose, and his power to make the world a better place for others who, like him, simply needed to be understood.